All right, good evening, everybody. We'd like to call to order the work session. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. In terms of announcements, I just want to make everybody aware that the public is hereby advised that the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purpose of rebroadcasting. In terms of executive session announcements, there was an executive session held on January 28th, 2016 for a matter of personnel regarding 2 professional staff employees and 1 administrative employee. In terms of attendance, we have everybody present other than Mr. Winters and Mr. Phillips.
And Mr. Winters is present on the phone.
Is he still on?
Yes.
Okay, Paul, sorry, I didn't realize you're still on. Thanks for hanging in there despite being on vacation in Florida. So the only one missing is really Mr. Phillips. Before I turn it over to Dr. Zerbe, I just wanted to say this is the first meeting where we're having the working session back in progress. So over the next couple months, we're going to be holding these type of meetings, and I look for the board to give feedback on how they feel they're working, and if they have suggestions on alternatives. I welcome that. We're trying to infuse the working session back into the process, so welcome feedback on how this is working or how to improve it, including the people out there that have a long history with these. All right, Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, work session, generally speaking, a work session, just for those new to the board, the intent is to really go through what the agenda would be at the voting meeting. So there are no votes for us to consider this evening, but there are opportunities for you to ask questions and for us to make any clarifications that are necessary on any of the agenda items for which you'll be asked to vote on the 23rd. So this evening, one of the items that we will be presenting, Mr. Whiteleather and I will present the budget as recommended at the January 26th meeting. So if I could ask all the board members to please take their seats in the first row, and we'd like to start the presentation. While Mr. Whiteleather has passed out a hard copy of his presentation here this evening, I just want to remind the board that following the meeting this evening, we will then post this presentation online as well. So this evening, Mr. Whiteleather and I will be presenting an update to the board on the status of the 2016-2017 budget. The budgeting process, like in previous years, began in September and is a process that includes many steps over several months to reach a final adopted budget in June of 2016. These many steps included the creation of a budget calendar that outlines the steps needed to be taken in the nearly year-long Act 1 process. It also included a schedule of building principals, department directors, and program supervisors working together with their staff to identify the needs for the 2016-17 school year. Those needs were presented to Mr. Whiteleather and I for consideration and possible inclusion in the proposed preliminary budget. We then prepared and presented a proposed preliminary budget in early December, where the board authorized the administration to seek exceptions within the Act 1 process. We then advertised the proposed preliminary budget under the law and had the Finance Committee of the board in January move the item forward for action by the board, which the board approved the proposed preliminary budget at the January 26th board meeting. At that same meeting in January, the board directed me to prepare and present at this work session meeting a budget that falls under the Act 1 index of 2.4% tax increase. At this evening's work session of the board, Mr. Whiteleather and I will be presenting the current status of our work on that budget. This is the work towards the directive that we were able to provide you this evening, just 2 weeks following our last meeting. The Act 1 process will take us into May, where we will seek approval from the Finance Committee of the board to move a proposed final budget forward, then ultimately seek approval in June for a final 2016-17 budget. So those last few comments were about the steps in the process. So this evening, we will be presenting the following. We will start with the previously presented proposed preliminary budget review, just a quick review. We will share a 5-year projected budgetary projection in summary format. We will share the impact of PEASERS, that's the Pennsylvania School Employees Retirement System, on the budget over the next several years. We will share our current work to date on the budget, and we will share our recommendations to address budgetary shortfalls, and we will share budgetary unknowns that have significant impact on the budget. Without any further ado, Mr. Whiteleather will continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Zerbe. Just wanted to take a few minutes this evening and go over our budget, what's been accomplished since the last time we have taken a look at things back in late part of January. This is a high-level summary of the budget as it was reflected in the preliminary document that the board did approve at their January 26th meeting. As you can see, we had our expenditures of slightly less than $107 million and revenues of $101.6 million, leaving us with a $5.2 million short. And as reflected in the preliminary budget, a tax increase to balance expenditures and revenues of 6.74%. Looking forward, under a projection basis, what we've done here is shown our expenditures, what is reflected in our current budget, what would be reflected in the preliminary budget as it stands here today, and then reflected here forward under a projection basis. Down here at the bottom reflects the surplus and/or deficit that would be reflected in the projection of our revenues and expenditures as they're reflected on this. The basis for this information was driven by using 13 years of historical audited numbers, generating that information looking forward, and our revenues reflect no tax increase. So these numbers here are obviously reflective of no increase in our local real estate tax collection. So PEASERS impact, obviously the PEASERS impact for the Methacton School District and frankly every other school district across the Commonwealth is a significant factor for us. What I've done here is shown our current budget salaries of $42.4 million, and then that is the PEASERS rate. Very simple mathematical calculation. You take your total salaries times that percentage, and that reflects your obligation to pay in towards PEASERS on behalf of all your employees. These numbers reflect the gross amount of contribution on the expenditure side of the budget as required. We do receive to current half reimbursement from the Commonwealth. But just to illustrate the magnitude of the increase, you can see for next year's budget, the gross amount of increase for the Methacton School District is a little over $2 million. And then looking forward, while the number goes down, it is still a significant driver of our overall expenditures looking forward. So as you can see, we're just below $11 million, and out the next 5 years, we're knocking on the door of $16 million in contribution. So what changes have occurred since we spoke on the budget on January 26th? The biggest single line item for us is our employee medical insurance. We participate in the Bucks Montgomery Health Consortium. We are one of, I believe, 22 school districts across Bucks and Montgomery County that participate in the health consortium. We function under what's called a first look, second look, and then third and final look in terms of rate renewal. Our initial rate renewal for the 16-17 budget, when we were looking at it, we were somewhere in the area of 8%. When we had made the decision to switch over to Aetna to administer our benefits, we did revise our number down to 5%. However, the second look has come back at 1.9%. So that is a savings to us from the original budget of over $500,000. The debt refunding item, this is reflective of our prior meetings where we had given direction to the administration to move forward with doing a refunding to achieve basically like refinancing your mortgage. You go to a less costly percent rate on their debt, and the first phase of that has saved us $130,000. Diesel fuel, another beneficial thing to the recent decrease in fuel costs. We participate in the consortium with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. As you can see, our fuel costs went down 74 cents a gallon. This is fuel for our school buses, which translates into $102,000 of savings for us. Dr. Zerbe and I took a proactive approach working with all our department and buildings to reduce their budgets. Thus far, this is a continuing process, but thus far we've reduced those budgets by $96,000. And then lastly, employee salaries and their associated FICA and retirement. This is based on our current numbers. This is obviously a very live number and will change going forward, but as it stands right now, we are down $18,000 based upon our look back to January 26th. So overall, our expenditure reductions are down just below $900,000. And on the local revenue side, our taxable assessments have gone up. Each month, we receive a report from the county showing all of the parcels across the school district and any increase or decrease associated with those values. Based upon this information, we are reflecting an increase to our collection by that dollar amount. So as you can see, between reducing our expenditures and having increases associated with our taxable assessments, we've been able to shave $1.1 million off of the original $5.2 million short. So as of right now, we're standing at a $4.1 million short of balancing our expenditures to our revenues. So what are our recommendations to address the preliminary budget short? We are obviously undertaking the debt refunding opportunity to save the school district money. We had originally talked about $2.5 million of savings associated with that. Right now, that savings appears to be closer to $4 million for us. So that's been very beneficial to us. Second part of this particular line item is a restructuring. Basically, what we have is our debt is set up in a way where it's over the next 8 or 9 years. Imagine walking down a set of steps. Our debt it tails off over about the next 8 or 9 years. Under a scenario where we could look at restructuring our debt to smooth out that decrease over that period of time can provide us with additional operational flexibility to the tune of about $1 million. So that is one area where we can take a look at reducing some of our operational expenditures for 16-17 and frankly beyond. We continue working with our building and departmental directors and supervisors on their budget and any possible areas of reduction. Our transportation route review will take place relative to any availability to enhance our operational efficiency, overlapping runs, any capacity that may be available for us to reduce other routes or runs to achieve some operational savings. Potential expansions of our employee medical waiver. What this means is that any employee who is eligible for health insurance and chooses not to take it, we provide them with a dollar amount. Our professional staff gets $1,100 a year, payable in November. Did a survey across the county. We would like to look at expanding that, enhancing that program to potentially get additional folks off of our insurance. The attractiveness to this is a typical two-party husband and wife situation for the school district, about $16,000 to $17,000 a year. Waiver for us of, say, $2,000. The differential between the two is a $14,000 savings for us for one individual employee. We have 76 employees who are currently on waiver. We would look to expand that under this particular scenario. And then lastly, we are looking to bring to the board a professional staff early retirement incentive. Basically, what we would be looking to do is help motivate some of our employees that may not be necessarily ready under a normal circumstance to retire early or retire at the end of this year. You provide them with under this scenario, a flat dollar amount that would be payable to them over the course of 2 years, an amount of $30,000, and those individuals who would go out under that then would be a long-term savings for us. Simply a mechanism of your higher compensated teachers leaving and or not replacing them, or replacing them with a teacher at the lower end of the salary schedule. There's typically about a $50,000 to $55,000 salary savings between a beginning step teacher and a senior teacher. So obviously that translates into dollars. And then obviously times the 30% PSERS rate as well. Higher paid teacher obviously is a much more costly component there, so the retirement incentive is one that we would also look at for next year's budget. So what this slide is doing is it's showing our overall expenditures and revenues basically in an a la carte list. So as you can see, set up in two separate columns. This first column on the left represents our budget as it stood on January 26th. The budget short without any tax increase of $5.2 million. What the Act 1 index would give us in terms of real estate value, real estate dollars, what the PSERS exception would give us in terms of dollars, and then ultimately what the short is. So it's basically taking this number, adding these two numbers in, and then the difference between the two is the short. As we just spoke about on the previous slide, the $130,000 savings that we already achieved by the first part of the debt refunding would then work in conjunction with the potential restructuring to achieve $1 million savings. So the $130,000 plus the $870,000 would give us the $1 million. The early retirement incentive savings, this would be the differential between the salaries and benefits paid to our senior staff versus new staff and or potentially not replacing them. And then lastly, an estimate of what a bus route review would give us in terms of savings for next year. And I'm not sure why this slide went. Technical assistance, please. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, thanks. All right. So that illustrates where we were at as of January 26th. So if we were to do all of the things that would be available to us, we would still be looking at a potential short of about $1.3 million, inclusive of all those options. As we spoke about earlier, we had a number of changes to our expenditure and revenue side. So basically following the same format, our expenditures reflective of the savings that I spoke about earlier, and then the increased dollars that were applicable to the assessment growth, and then how again, using the same index, the PSERS exception, what that short would then be, and then subtracting off the debt restructuring, the ERIP, and the transportation route review. So you can see we made a considerable dent in our overall deficit as projected here in the mid part of February. So in closing, what are our current and future budget unknowns? Obviously, the state budget, we don't have a formalized budget for the current year, let alone next year. The governor's made some offerings of what the state subsidies were going to be for school districts, but until that is legislatively negotiated and approved and ultimately signed by the governor, I caution us on using any of those numbers for budgeting purposes. Federal funding, we obviously do not have our budget numbers allocation for 16-17 as of yet. We've obviously spoken about school consolidation and potential timelines associated with that. And what I've tried to do here is show an impacted time that would be applicable for that. So if we would start talking about potentially school consolidation, the potential impact for that may be for 17-18. Tax assessment appeals, that would be ongoing for us. Our high school schedule review as approved by the board previously. Our staffing component is something we would look at on an ongoing basis. Grade progressions, population, all those things would factor into how we would look at staffing across the organization. We obviously have a facilities assessment that is ongoing, and I would envision, based upon the delivery of the product in April, that we would be looking at something in the summer to put together what would be a plan of attack to address our facilities based upon needs and prioritization. Our third look, medical and RX numbers, cautiously optimistic that by March and April we would have an even better number for the school district in terms of rate renewal for next year. And then lastly would be contract negotiations. Obviously in January of next year, be typical of when we would start negotiating with our bargaining groups, as all of our bargaining unit agreements are up as of the end of the 16-17 fiscal year. And with that, we'll turn that back over to Dr. Zerby.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteleather. So in closing, given all the information presented here this evening, the current status of our work towards the directive, the recommendations, and the budgetary unknowns, it is critical that you understand that the budgetary process, the Act 1 process, typically takes us well into May to finalize a budget. So as part of that process, I will be asking, I will be seeking your direction at the February 23rd meeting on each of the following three matters. The first one would be the debt restructuring plan. Simply put, shall the administration prepare a debt restructuring plan for the board's consideration? 2, expanding the employee medical waiver incentive program. Shall the administration prepare a presentation for expanding the employee medical waiver incentive program for your consideration? And third, the professional staff early retirement incentive. This one is more timely than the previous two, so I will be providing the board with the early retirement incentive program information in the Friday memo, as well as posting that on the agenda 72 hours in advance for the public to review. But I'll be asking you on the 23rd and seeking your approval so that I could move forward on the 24th of February, if approved, moving that incentive forward, if you so wish me to do that. So we provide you with this budgetary status update and seek your comments and further direction on the recommendations. And that ends our presentation. I'll ask the board if they would take their seats back at the table, and we can have a conversation on the matter.
All right, we'll open up for discussion on the presentation from the board. Sure can.
Okay, so on page 5, you've listed Department and Building reductions of $96,000. Can we get a breakdown on what those are, either by building or by department or both, so that we can look at what's going into that reduction?
Yes, we can do that. Do you want that now? I mean, in general, it's coming out of our maintenance budget, and it's also coming out of technology and my office.
I have something, a couple of things that I noticed when going through this. If we go to page 7, in your budget short recommendations, you are including the PSERS exception in there in order to get your remaining shortfall. I believe my motion was to come in below the 2.4%. So in reality, our shortfall is still like 1.1 million if you throw in that PSERS exception. So that should be our goal then, to work on that 1.1 and see where we can go. And I realize, trust me, I realize there's a lot of moving parts to this still. So I think that's an achievable goal if we really sharpen the pencils and wait and see how things shake out. I mean, there's a lot of things going on here with the VERIP and bus route review. 250 grand, that's a good bit. And of course, the debt restructuring. So, but I just wanted to point that out to the board. One other thing I saw in here. Oh, that's all right. I'll go cover it later on. Thanks.
Yes, on page 6, where there are several items that you're thinking that we can consider. The first item talks about debt refunding, and you were talking about flattening the amount of decrease, I guess, that there is. And while that could be helpful in the short term, is it painful in the long term? Will we pay more money out as a result of doing some kind of a restructuring of debt?
Yes, when you push out a debt into filling in what would otherwise be a decrease, there is some interest impact associated with that. But looking at the total package between doing the straight refunding, that would achieve for us right now, our financial advisor's given us a target of approximately $4 million now. That in conjunction with the potential costs associated with the debt restructuring, we are basically looking at still about $3.1 million of overall savings. The present value of doing the restructuring is about $271,000. So $271,000 of additional cost by doing the restructuring to achieve the $1 million savings year over year. And then in conjunction with our present value of the straight refunding going from a higher rate to a lower rate. The combo of those two still achieves us a little over $3 million in overall savings versus what we would be paying here today by doing nothing.
A couple more. And on the transportation route review, would we be outsourcing that to anybody to do that calculation? Don't we have somebody who is already working on efficiencies for transportation?
Yes, we would utilize in-house staff to help with the route review, as well as looking at an outside individual to help us with the evaluation of all of our runs, to help us determine if there are areas where we can look at that would help us achieve an overall savings operationally to the district. Because say, even if we were to reduce one bus across the entire organization, that's a $45,000 savings. So the benefit of us bringing in somebody from the outside to help in that regard to the tune of maybe $3,000 to $5,000 would pay for itself many times over by just looking at potentially one bus run being reduced.
And would that have an impact on the children? I've been listening to parents talking about how long their children are already on the buses and the routes that they take. If we were going to cut out some buses, would that impair the traffic for the children?
Any route review would be a collaborative process, meaning that it would not be simply a mechanism of saying this route could be reduced, let's just do it. It's more of a looking at the cost versus benefit. If the cost of doing something is such where it's going to impact negatively on the organization to a level that is not acceptable to us, then ultimately the decision is ours. We ultimately would say yay or nay to an operational change. So whether the consultant would bring back to us a number of recommendations does not mean that we would have to agree to those. All of them, none of them, some of them. It would be more of, here's what I can recommend, here's the trade-off. You ultimately have the decision to make whether or not you choose to go forward with one or more of my recommendations. And if you do, here's the savings that you have, but here's the impact of those. So there would be a list generated of, here's a recommendation, here's what it impacts, and here's the outcome if you would choose to do that.
Thank you. And I'm still going down that list. The next item is the medical waiver incentive. And is that not part of our bargaining agreement with many of our staff? And is that something that we could do independent of dealing with the bargaining agreement?
It is part of the professional bargaining agreement. The $1,100 is stipulated within the agreement. Certainly, changes can be made to an current contract through what's called an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Really, what it's more so a mechanism of is realizing the potential savings that could be associated with this. If we were to move one person off of our plan that are two-party coverage to waiver, we could save $14,000 as an example. If that were magnified by 10 people, then you really start to talk about some significant dollars. So we do have mechanism to address within an in-force agreement. We would obviously looking at basically any stone that we can unturn to generate savings, potential savings to us, operational savings to us, is really the basis for which we've brought this and the other recommendations to the board for your consideration and review as we would go through the budget. Hopefully deriving at a number and an operation that's reflective of where we can be the best way possible.
Thank you. And then the last one is the early retirement incentive. How often have we done that in the last several years? And is it your recommendation that we should consider doing that this year again?
We've offered it 2 times in the last 3 years. It's been very successful for us. The most recent one we've offered, we had 19 staff members take it. We were able to not replace 6 of those positions for the school district, which generated in excess of $1 million savings for us. Between all of the people who retired and were replaced and the savings associated with them, plus the 6 positions that we did not replace at all. So we have gone through and identified individuals who could be eligible for retirement under a normal superannuation retirement, which is 35 years, or 25 years of service and age 55 and over. So we've looked at identifying numbers that would fall within each one of these categories, and through utilizing this incentive would hopefully entice those individuals, or a number of those individuals, to take advantage of this to help us relative to our operational cost center in that particular category for 16-17.
Ms. Hackett, if I may just chime in a little bit on the employee incentive retirement program. And Mr. Harney, you might need to chime in on here with me, but essentially, because this is probably more of an immediate recommendation to get before you, I thought it would be appropriate for us to at least have a significant amount of conversation about that this evening, so that you're better prepared informationally to make a decision here in next week. So when we looked at this, we often consider not necessarily doing an early retirement incentive program on an annual basis, because the concept is, we want to provide something that may be unexpected, that will provide and encourage a large group of people to take an incentive and move and assist us as this previous years did. But when we looked at the eligible people for this incentive, as well as for a future year after, it makes sense for us to make that incentive happen this year. So, Mr. Harn, I don't know if you can provide some numbers or share or chime in on that.
Sure. If you recall, last time we did this, we talked about a pool of candidates that were eligible at the various levels that they could go out in retirement. And we had so many at that point that we put a limit on that when we started that, because we were afraid that we might get too many at that point. A lot of those people are still in that eligible pool. Right now we have 6 folks that are eligible for full retirement, 35 years. We've got 5 folks that are eligible for full retirement due to age 62. That's 62 years and 1 year of service makes you fully eligible to retire with no penalty. We have 14 at the 55-25 threshold, which is 55 years of age and 25 years of service. There's also another threshold that we didn't have anybody in that specific category, but just for your knowledge, it's a full retirement of 60 and 30 years, age 60 and 30 years of service. So that's a pool of 26 people. The pool was a little larger last year, but surprisingly, as we said last year, we were afraid we might get too many, so we still have a lot of those folks still in this pool. And as we looked out 1 more year, is it worth doing it this year, or should we wait a year to see how we're going to pull in that many more people? There really aren't that many more that are going to fall into those categories in the subsequent year, so it was decided that this probably would be a good opportunity to offer it again. Next year, if a lot of these people go, probably not as much, due to the fact that we don't have a lot of people rolling into those various categories of eligibility.
We already have some people who have told us they're going to retire, though. Is that right?
Just one.
Just one,
We've had
okay.
conversations
And that
with one
person would then be eligible for this program?
Correct.
Okay.
I missed, you said you also have a 60-30 option.
I did. I missed the 60-30 option.
That's part of full retirement. We don't have anybody that happens to fall right into that threshold.
Okay, because I was doing the math, and I was like, I didn't think you did, but I wasn't sure. I'm trying to forget the past because it's done, but I have to at least get on record that I feel like we wouldn't be in the situation we're in if certain things weren't done, but I won't get into it, but I just have to get it off my chest so I can move on to the future. As far as these 3 things that you're discussing for next week, as an educator, I will just say, it's nice to hear the professional staff early retirement option because financial, like the numbers make sense, but also just from an educator point of view, our veteran teachers are so important, and we need our veteran teachers. However, if there are so many at this level, and with all professions these days, we're all a little burnt out a little earlier than I think we were before because everybody's working harder and longer. I just will say that I think it's a good thing, and that's it.
If I could just comment on that for just a second. The incentive, like we provided last year, would require a minimum threshold, and we would also put a maximum threshold, because we're equally concerned about how an incentive like this would be put out, and we certainly, wouldn't want to see, an entire building, retire. And it's unlikely for that to occur, but I think to your point, our veteran teachers are the teachers that teach our new teachers, and that's why we have those thresholds in there to help control that to a degree.
I guess I'll go next. Please bear with me since this is a working session. This is a lot. I'm going to go through this page by page, and hopefully there's not too many questions here. Just right on page 2, where we have expenditures from January 26th, and then we have a revenue number there with the shortage and the 6.74%. The revenue number on this page is an increase from the current budget, correct?
Correct.
All right, and that is roughly a little over $1 million.
Correct. The major component of that is the PSERS reimbursement from the state, representing approximately 1/2 of our increase in cost, as reflected on that other slide.
Okay. And moving forward to page 3, I guess I have a tough time looking at things. I know that as a presentation, you're just trying to give us a summary of what we're looking at here, but when we're talking about a $5-point-some million shortfall and how we're trying to make it up, I'd kind of like to see, similar to what we had on the December finance meeting, I guess it was, where the expenditures were broken down into your mandatory expenditure categories. There was, I think, 12 before. And then you broke out your operational and year-to-year variances. I know Mr. Dorn had actually asked at a prior finance meeting, too, to try to have some history along these levels. It's really hard to see when you're looking and you're projecting out, what's driving all these. I know we're saying an average of 13-year average of the historical audited numbers, but is that really a accurate way to just straight line budget out? I know some things we had said that are not necessarily the average. I think transportation, the last time we met, you said you did just do the 2.5. But I think in terms of the public trying to see what's doing this, and just myself trying to understand what's driving these significant increases going forward, I mean, we know that salaries will be up in the air after this current budget because, well, a new contract will be in place, so that's a little bit harder. We can use more recent numbers as opposed to 10 years ago what the salary increases looked like as opposed to the last 3 to 4 years. Debt, I guess I'll get into the debt part of this. For the refunding, obviously it always makes sense when you find substantial savings to do a bond refunding and get your actual realized savings that way. That is the way to go. I'm a little bit wary of the restructuring part. I think you said it was $271,000 was roughly the increase cost looking down the road. Is that correct? Is it possible to see, I know years ago, and I think it's still available, but to see what our debt structure actually looks like, broken down, and then going out, so that we can truly see, what's coming on the books, what's coming off the books. I would find it very hard to vote yes to move ahead with this debt restructuring without really knowing what it looks like going forward. $271,000 doesn't sound like that much of an increase, but when we're talking about making some cuts, although minor, to not doing maintenance in some of the buildings, these are some things that we might need to borrow in the future. So if we start leveling everything out now, and then we actually do need to borrow, that leveling out will actually jump back up again. So I'd like to see more of a detailed look, I guess, in terms of our debt going forward for this year. And you said, I guess it's 8 or 9 years, so maybe almost a 10-year lookout is kind of, I think, what we would need here.
So if I just interrupt on that conversation, I mean, that's essentially what we would need to do. If we were directed by the board to bring a plan forward, we would bring our financial folks forward. They would, have the documents that would show, where the debt is, and we could have those conversations with them as they're the ones giving us, the professional advice on these matters. So if it's something that the board would consider, then we would move to engage them. And while people might have concern about that expense, it's still a matter of should we at least entertain it to a conversation level and to get the details as you're suggesting. So if the board's not shutting the door on the 23rd, we'll ask for your approval to bring them forward in a future meeting. Likely a finance committee meeting to start, and then to the full board if the finance committee is, feels it's appropriate to do so. I mean, that I think would be the right process.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I'm not, shutting the door on the possibility. I'm just kind of making it known ahead of time so that when they, if we do say that let's go ahead and see what this plan looks like, that they come to us with actual details. I would not want just a summarized, 2 or 3 thing. This would be the overall savings. I would like to actually see what that would look like. So if we reach out and we move ahead with this, all I'm really saying is let's make sure that it's a very detailed account of what we're looking at.
I'd leave that more towards the Finance Committee to recommend that, since they're going to be the first look at that.
I mean, that would be fine. We'd have to wait to the Finance Committee meeting, I imagine, which we don't have it technically scheduled at this point. Our next meeting is really on the 23rd, and we're looking, while a lot of the matters are financial related, including the early retirement incentive, that's something that we're going to have that, even if we're even going to consider it, and we got to get it out ASAP. And so I will need your approval on the 23rd, just like I'm going to ask for your approval on these other matters to at least bring them forward. You're not accepting them. So I know Mr. Whiteleather gave you some numbers here this evening, but put all that aside. What I'm suggesting is that I'll come forward for you to direct me to bring those things forward, and we can then decide on the process. But I do want us to decide that, we're going to spend our time, because here's from a practicality, if the board would suggest that this is not something that they'll ever consider, I can't waste my time or his time or anyone's time on the matter. And so, because this Act 1 process is really a time-based process. We have certain things that we got to put in place, and so we'd have certain other actions that we'd have to take if we weren't going to take, a potential look at restructuring.
So, does anybody have any objections to bringing that level of detail forward on what the debt looks like, and so that we can make a decision on the 23rd around the restructuring?
You're not deciding on the restructuring. I think what Dr. Zerbe is saying is that the next step is to bring in those people, and they will begin to do that paperwork.
Yes.
But we're not approving a restructuring plan on the 23rd. It's
just to bring forward that information.
Right.
I would actually go a step further and say you should start working on all of these items. I mean, you really know, you can't the board cannot vote on any of these 5 recommendations to address the preliminary budget shortage without more information. So in theory, you really should be starting to work on all of these. I mean, Bob Harney can work on that. I mean, probably very similar to what we did last year. Medical waiver incentive, that's already something you can do. The transportation route review, definitely need to start working on that if you're going to get a third-party person in here. And then the budget, the departmental budget reviews, those are ongoing all the way to the very end. And the debt refunding, that does take time. So yes, I would say you should work on all these.
I have a couple of questions going forward here. So you were still doing it?
I
Okay.
interrupted Michael, and so I think you said you were going to go through every slide, so.
So I think everybody's in agreement with what Herb said, is just bring the information forward.
So as board president, you're telling me that those items that we're recommending are things we should bring forward?
Bring forward with more information
With
on.
more information?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get back. Page 4, for the PSERS impact. Has there been a new release, and I say new, since December, I guess it was December 8th, they put out their last, look going forward with potential PSERS rates. These numbers already look tough to deal with, but I actually think, according to the latest things that I could find, that these numbers are actually, higher. For 2017-18, I have 3204. 2018-19, 3327. 2019-20, 3420. And I just pulled this off of the site. Do we know? Have you gotten updated information since then that this will be tailored back? Because that could be substantial moving forward, the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, the PSERS does put out projections. Unfortunately, this year is a great example. We got a little burned because when I put together the original budget presentation back in December, the rate that I was using was one that was put out in the projection, and that ultimately wound up changing and led to us increasing our expenditure for PSERS in excess of $200,000. So the numbers certainly do reflect significant cost center for us, and as numbers would be updated, I would try to provide those to you in a way just to illustrate the magnitude of the issue, but it's just a yearly mechanism that the rate is truly not the rate until it's certified by PSERS. But to your point, that if the latest information that you have reflects rates that are in excess of this, yes, the impact could be that much greater to us in terms of a cost center just for this individual line item looking for the next 5 years.
Okay, yeah, I just want to double check, because like you said, it did change this year, but, in terms of an overall percentage, it affected us around 200,000, but it was still a relatively minor alteration to their projection. And if you're looking forward, we could be off by a full 2% in 18-19 and 19-20. So not necessarily saying that anything on this slide is wrong. I'm just giving a broader picture to the rest of the board that, as that number going out, looked pretty tough with what our deficit could be if we never raise taxes. Believe it or not, could actually be worse. And it's projected, as of now at least, that it could be worse. So I just want to make sure that everyone has that in their head moving forward. If we go to, just building a little bit off of what Kim had asked for the department and building reductions, is it across this, so if you did the elementary schools, was it a flat cut across all 5? Did they all get the same cut, or was there specific schools that were targeted? I'm just curious, how we came about.
In regards to the maintenance?
Yeah, for anything. Did each school, 5 elementary schools, did they get the same percentage cut? Arcola, Skyview, and the high school, was it straight across the board, or how was that number arrived at, kind of? And I think that's kind of what Kim was asking as well.
Yeah, so maybe this is a part where I can give a little bit of history. So in years prior to, I think the year prior to my arrival, there were percentage cuts to all departments and buildings in the neighborhood of, 10, 15%. Is that right?
Each building took $10,000 cut.
Okay, so it was a 10,000, it wasn't percentage, it was a $10,000, okay. In years since I've been here, we've done building reductions on a percentage basis as well, and allocations like that, $10,000, $15,000. I think last year, not last year, 2 years ago, we were at, what was it? 10%? So why I'm sharing that with you is, while we've done those types of things and we've said, for each building principal or each department to go back and, you need to reduce your budget by 10%, we've done that in so many number of years. In my recent work with the building principals, I can tell you that there really isn't, and as you probably know, looking at where all of our expenditures are, there's a very small amount sitting in, our supplies. And while I can go and cut all that, that's not going to help us to a significant degree here. But I am not of the philosophy that, every penny counts. So, please understand that while it doesn't make a huge dent, it's maybe one portion of the pie. But then on the flip side of that is really we need to remain effective in what we do. And without pens, papers, crayons, all those types of things, while, some home and schools are very generous and supply those things for their students, we don't necessarily get them. That's not consistent across all buildings, so that's just not where all the supply money goes. So what we're looking at now is looking at, more of what do we do operationally within the building, where within our department budgets can we do without sacrificing our performance, without sacrificing our ability to provide the programs and services that we have. And I've stated in previous meetings where, we kind of may have to put stuff off for a year that we wanted to do. But, that was fine when we were maybe making some headway, but as you can see with the 5-year projection that we're throwing in front of you here this evening, that while we might be putting stuff off, we might have to put it off again another year and another year after that. So our choices are becoming few and far between about how to manage the budget. But we have a process in place. We're bringing some of these recommendations, as you can see, and we hope to bring further recommendations down the road.
No, thank you for that. And I'm actually kind of glad to hear the way that you explain that, because, and just thinking about it, I was hoping that we're not making a straight cut across all the schools, because obviously we know we have some schools that need things more than others do, and we're not taking a straight cut across all the schools. That we've actually looked and targeted specific things to come up with that.
The 96,000 is targeted reductions.
Okay, perfect. Most of the other questions were answered on that sheet. I just had one other. Stuart, this would go to you. When we were looking at the medical waiver incentive, and you had done some research across the districts, did any of them indicate to you if they had raised from a certain dollar amount to a higher dollar amount, how many new people actually took that? I know we said that our number in comparison to theirs was lower, so we could raise it to be, equivalent or somewhere in the range. But did they happen to give you any idea of, if they had done something like this recently and what their numbers increased?
I did not ask for that specific information. I just asked for what their waiver amounts were as compared to what we currently offer, to see whether or not we were competitive with the average for the county or not in terms of the waiver amount.
Okay. Alrighty. Slide 7. So, and I guess this gets to a broader question, kind of what Mr. Roth was saying before, that the idea for coming together tonight, and I realized it was short notice. You guys had 2 weeks to try to come up with the 2.4, but I thought the idea was to arrive at the 2.4 with what cuts would need to be done. I know we've found savings, certainly, but I thought that the idea was to try to, if we really are going to hit, 2.4 or 2.39 or whatever that looked like, what type of things would that entail? What things would we need to make decisions on? And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just, it's a shame that Mr. Phillips isn't here tonight, but, I believe that it would lead to the same conversation of what would the 0% look like? I'm just trying to anticipate conversations moving forward and other, board meetings that we're going to have where we're voting on things that I almost feel like sometimes instead of just trying to shoot for a number and show the savings from one meeting to another meeting, that it almost could help to have, different roads taken. That, the idea was given at the last meeting to arrive at the 2.4. I thought it was, kind of rushed during that meeting, but as part of the Finance Committee meeting tonight, that, that was going to be part of the conversation I was going to have is, what does our budget look like at 3.72 with the, the PSERS increase included? What does the budget look like at 2.4? What does the budget look like 1.2 or 0? So that the board really knows and the public knows what is 0% when we're talking $5.2 million. What things would that be? And I know that, we don't like to talk about the possibilities, things that would need to be cut. Because as soon as you mention it, people are going to start wondering, what are those cuts going to look like? They're thinking about doing this. That's not what I'm asking for. And I think if the conversation is structured properly, that it's not we're going to cut this. It's if this is what we're aiming for, this is what would need to be cut. And I know that there's probably others up here that might disagree with that. And like I said, I'm certainly not saying that a 0% is the way to go. It's funny, if you look at the PSERS impact and the exception, it's almost dollar for dollar the short that we had last year. So it's almost like you hate to go above the Act 1 index, but it's probably what should have been done last year. So it's different things like this, it's different roads like this that I think might be helpful for, just in anticipation of what people might talk about at the next board meeting. And I know it's more work, it's certainly more work, because you're aiming for different numbers. And maybe I'm wrong here and others can chime in. But that's just a thought that I had, that I'd like to see a bigger picture, and it kind of gets into the idea of the mandatory expenditure breakdown. What does that really look like, and what would it look like if you're not making the cut on expenditures, you're making the cut on salaries, PSERS, medical, and employer FICA, because you're talking people then. What does that look like? If we're talking about early retirement plans, the ideas out there, are we replacing, or are we going to try to, see if we can get by without them? And what does that look like? How does that impact education? I just think that these are some of the things that, I hate to give more work and ask for more things, but in order to make an educated decision, and not just on 1 year, and I think that this is really important, because you went ahead and did this 5 years out, we got to stop looking to just hit that number for this year, that you got to look beyond, because we can trim everything, to a T to hit the number for this year, but we're going to get to the point now where there's certain things, which is, where we keep looking to cut, or to find savings. Cut's the wrong word there. But we're gonna hit a wall where there's only so much, diesel savings you can find. And I think that these are uncomfortable conversations to have, but I think they're conversations that might need to be had. And I will pass. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a couple of things. A lot of it has been stated already. On the early retirement incentive, I think you said a payout of $30K for 2 years. Is that the same incentive as was offered last time?
Yes.
Do we have any idea about, with the medical waiver incentive, about what the potential pool of employees that, I guess, the target pool is probably dual income that have a spouse that carries benefits as well. Do we have any idea of what that potential pool of people versus what the number of people that accepted it previously, and what that pool might be now?
We are working on that incentive program. In fact, it's going to be very similar to, it's turning out to be structured very similar to that what we do for the early retirement incentive. We need to find the right match of individuals above and beyond what's currently, that are currently accepting the waiver in order to maximize the offer that we're providing. So we need to do a little more math and some homework on that before we present that information to you. But essentially, we want to be able to protect the district by offering an incentive that will get us a specific targeted amount of savings. And that's what we need to work in. That's why you don't see that particular number in our budget presentation, because we have some more work on that yet.
Okay. I wanted to reiterate what Herb said. The PSER exception wasn't part of your motion initially, so we probably have to rework this, this column, because this 889,000, I think by the motion, and Herb, correct me if I'm wrong, was the index, 2.4%, less than the 2.4%, not the 2.4% plus PSERs.
Correct.
So for the board meeting, we probably should rework this to reflect what the motion was, I think.
Are you referring, the board meeting, there's no question about what the direction was from the board. I stated that up front. I wanted to make sure that the board understood that I knew what the direction was. And I tried to, within the few short weeks that we've had between that directive and this evening, to provide you the budget. I don't particularly, I didn't plan on providing this presentation or an adjusted presentation at the board meeting on the 23rd. That's...
And I don't know if you need to. I would just say that
But I think what you're saying is
column
we
isn't
need to
reflected per the motion, and we should correct the math on it to show we're really 1.109 million short. Just to reflect it as that's our challenge, that's our target still.
And that's fair.
Okay.
That statement.
And I'd like to say also that the work of this obviously will be continued through the Finance Committee meetings. But I think it was a good, exercise for the board to see. And then in closing, I think we do need to move on. We're at 9 o'clock now, but I mean, as part of the, to Mike's point about, seeing what a budget looks like, I think we'll see that in the oncoming months in March and April, as we get closer and some of the things settle down and we get a little bit more data. At least that's been my experience. That, getting those numbers to find out what a 0% budget, well, that's, the administration could say, okay, sure, we're going to cut A, B, C, and D. Problem is you may not need to do that, so why even go down that road, okay? My whole point with making this motion was to bring a 6.7% increase budget to a school board meeting was not in my mind, logical. When you knew that there was a lot going on, I realized we had to bring something because of the timelines, and you had to have a vote. Still, I think that this is very good. I think the administration did a great job with this, and Stuart with, the debt restructuring, I definitely, think that could be huge. It have always been. Now, I know that previous boards have looked at that and said, no, we don't want to spend money to save money. However, when you look at the long run and see how the impact it will be over 10 years or however it is, you really have to take another look at that and see how it works out. But I thank you for doing this. I think it was very well done.
I had a couple more things. So on your list on page 8, I still think, as I recall from the previous board, that there were some maybe additional strategic sourcing efforts that we might look at, like transportation, like you've done with food service. So I do think that should be on our longer-term list, that we should still kind of look at the potential for. And then lastly, if we're going to have a potential early retirement, does it make sense, Dr. Zerby, to take the high school schedule review, which I know wasn't supposed to be done until 2016? Is there any way to accelerate some portion of it in case we've got teachers that might take the early retirement that would have been involved with a potential schedule redo, so we don't then hire a teacher to only have to let them go, 12 months later. So I don't know if that's possible. That's probably over-accelerating it. But, you worry about that, bringing somebody on short-term. And maybe there would be nobody in that pool. You guys would probably, at first it would have to be high school teachers, and then it would have to be, somebody that you may think has, some of that schedule, additional schedule hours that may be caught up in this review. But it sure would seem like if we did the early retirement and we brought somebody on only to let them go, that we probably ought to look at that. I just don't know if it's possible. It's a lot of work to do what that study was going to produce.
I think the study, while the consultants can assist us, if the information that comes forward in the early retirements, suggests, to engage them in another side conversation to look at that, we certainly could. We'd have to wait until May, basically, which is, what we would probably indicate in our early retirement incentive would be the deadline for teachers to accept. That's what the proposal is going to be. So, but your point's well taken. I think when the information presents itself to engage them in that conversation, then great. If not, we don't lose anything in the matter. We're still on target to, have that assessment completed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? And before I go to Paul? Okay. Paul, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just real quick. Hope you can hear me okay. I guess the quick question for Scott is, I'm not sure when the capital plan is supposed to be due, coming back to us with the requirements for the 8 schools.
Mid-April, Paul.
April? Okay, thank you. And then I guess I would only, the number 5, obviously I'm not looking at the presentation, but if I took my notes properly, it's $1,100 for the exclusion of the medical waiver, and we're proposing to take it to $2,000. I don't know who asked, I think Mike or somebody asked the question earlier about the comparable medical plans. I certainly would think we should move forward with it, but I would have hesitation with this one because it could cost us money. It could cost us $75,000 if we don't get any takers. So from that perspective, we need to be able to compare the medical plans of the different schools that we're comparing this $2,000 average to. So if we have a better or worse medical plan compared to those schools, that goes into the equation. So most of the other comments I've agreed with everybody else. So that's it for me. Thank you.
In terms of the effort that's been put in, first off, Stu, I appreciate the amount of detail you shared tonight and the amount of questions you've been able to answer off the top of your head has been really impressive. So thanks for all that, answering all those questions. For the board members looking at the budget, when we see these numbers, and you've heard all the different questions and everything, and we talk about reducing something by X number of dollars, I think one of the guidance we need back from you folks is, when we've kind of squeezed the different areas enough, are we, to reduce any more, are we at a point where now we're talking programs? And not to get into specific programs, but, when you're reducing things, if the next stage is to reduce programs, which means reducing staffing, not that we're considering reducing any specific staffing, but to kind of educate us on that level, that, to take this budget down to a 2.4 or 1.2 or 0, really, now we're talking reducing programs and people. Just give that general education in terms of communications around things, I think would be helpful, because it's hard for some of us to look at a reduction of, pick a number, $100,000, and to know if there's anything more that can be squeezed out of that certain area, or if that's really, you're running on the bare bones, and then we got to move to the next in terms of making decisions, which nobody wants to reduce programs, but I think from an educational perspective, to know that's really all that's left out there, and to get to a certain % increase in budget from year to year, you're talking X number of employees. So that's the type of information I think that would be helpful going forward. All right. So I think to Herb's point, it's after 9, and we've talked quite a little bit about this, so I appreciate all the discussion on this.
Do you want me to move on to the next item?
Yeah, why don't you move on?
Okay. So the next item on the agenda, and I'm just going to go down through the agenda. At the February 23rd meeting, we'll have some recognition of school board members. Typically, January is the month, but because of the weather, we rescheduled the activities that we planned to have. I'll also bring forward the school consolidation timeline, and I'll present that on the 23rd. Under reports, there will be committee reports that people will present. There will be public comment on action items on the 23rd as well. And you will be seeking your approval of the minutes as per the agenda. We went over the fiscal items that are listed on the work session agenda. They were discussed at the Finance Committee meeting, so I don't believe there's any additional questions there. Mr. Harney, personnel items?
Yes, for this month, we'll be bringing one resignation of Ms. O'Donnell, office assistant at the high school. And just since it is a work session, we can jump around a little bit. You'll see that on letter E, she's going to be, not letter A, I'm sorry, letter I, not letter I, letter K. She's moving to our casual on-call list. So she's leaving us on a permanent level, but we are going to then be hiring her as a casual on-call, so she'll be a substitute for us. She's just no longer going to be a full-time employee. We're also asking you to accept the resignation of Pat Salamito, who is one of our instructional assistants at Skyview Upper Elementary School. We are asking you to hire our long-term substitute classified, Christina Smith, and that is directly related to the extension of the uncompensated leave right below it there for Maria DeMarco. So Christina will be filling in for Maria effective through April 29th. We have supplemental contracts that are going to be for your approval. We have our outdoor education contracts for our teaching staff at Skyview for your approval. Those trips will be coming up shortly. I've got 2 items that I'm going to take off this list for you because they were already approved when I went back and looked at the list from last month. It's number 2, Matthew Alberg. You can take that off. That will not be coming forward. That was already approved in January, as was Michael Handley. So those 2 are going to come off the agenda for next week. We have some additional hires filling in for our coaching staff that you'll see there, mostly track. We are also going to be bringing forward the list of volunteers for this month that is attached for your review. And we have one transfer of one of our custodians who's going to be moving from the Transportation Facility Center, Frinas Center Facilities Building, which was a split assignment, to now he's going to be at the Arc Hall Intermediate Skyview campus. And that's it so far.
Are there any questions for Mr. Harney on personnel items? Yep.
Sorry, just one real quick one.
Sure.
For number 1, for the approval of the supplemental contracts for the outdoor education,
Yes.
How many contracts does that include? Do we know?
We have, This isn't total, but I can count them for you.
No, even a ballpark.
That's approximately 24 contracts in there. There's one individual who's going twice. A special education teacher's going to go with 2 classes. We also have the contract for the nurse that goes on every trip, so that's a multiple expense. And we also have the coordinator's contract in there, which is all the work that he does in setting up the program. So, but overall, it's approximately 24 separate contracts.
And is that about the same as it's been in prior years?
Yes,
There's been no
it's-
reductions in the outdoor education program?
Nope, it's all the teams for 5th grade, and they go every year.
Okay, perfect.
And just for the record, how's that funded?
That's that's paid through the parents, actually. And in some special needs cases, we do have assistance from home and school.
I just know that that's a favorite program of a lot of people, and I just want to make sure that that program hasn't seen any drop-off or anything like that. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Harney? Okay. Continuing on with the agenda, item number 11, curriculum and programs. There will be no items for the board's approval on the 23rd. Under policy, there are 9 policies for the board to consider for first reading. Again, you will have between February 23rd and the meeting scheduled in March, which will be which will likely be the second reading of any of the policies. So at this point, are there any questions on any of the policies, or what are called policies or the committee profiles as listed?
Just real quick, were these from the policy meeting till what we'll see here, the ones that we were looking at that needed a little bit of follow-up and everything, will those changes be made before or after?
Yes, so there were corrections made, except it wasn't until as of this afternoon, I believe it was policy 113.4. That policy was updated online. The corrected version from the director was posted. So there were recommendations from the committee to correct what was, essentially there was a pre-screening recommendation on the policy to look at something that didn't exist. And so that was fixed. And so it's now reflective of what we talked about. Thank you.
I have a question. On the committee profile for the Education Committee, there were a couple of reports of testing that were on a previous profile that were not on the current profile. Did you want to talk about that tonight, or is that something you would talk about next week?
I think that would be appropriate to talk next week, and then we can make the adjustments if the board approves those adjustments, and then we can have them between the 2 readings. Yep, thank you. Any other comments or questions on policy? Okay. Continuing on with the agenda, under other, please, let's just take a moment. I want to talk to you about the instructional calendar for the 2016-2017 school year. I provided that as part of an attachment on the agenda here for this evening. And I'm just going to mention a few comments. And I want to let you know that the start of school is recommended for September 6th, and that is similar to Perkiomen Valley's start of school. The start of the school year also falls within the start of the North Monco Technical Career Center, so they're planning to start on, I believe, the 31st. And so when our students arrive on the 6th, they'll be able to take part in the North Monco Technical Career Center immediately. The end of the school year is currently on the agenda for Monday, June 12th. That is ending earlier than 2 other schools within our vocational technical group. And the schedule basically resembles a balance in the months and is consistent with the district's calendars over the past 5 or 6 years. So this is the calendar that I'm recommending. It was reviewed with me and with the, as per contract with the association.
So, Dr. Zerbe, let me just ask you a question, because I know this probably comes up every year, or questions about it. So, snow days, right? We take them away from the Easter break, at least that's what's happening this year. And you probably end up with a lot less attendance because parents probably have trips booked. I would imagine, I don't know, you probably have statistics on it, how many kids don't show up. I'm sure there's some percentage decline because people have invested and paid maybe non-refundable trips. Why don't we build in snow days and call the end of school the 14th and then be able to retract back if you don't use them? It just doesn't make logical sense to me.
Essentially, based on our bargaining agreement with one of our associations, the Teachers Association, it spells out in there how snow days will be used. And we bargain that right away at some moment in time. Can't tell you when, but when we bargain that away, we bargain away our ability to use the first two, to determine what the first 2 snow days would be.
What could we have possibly gotten for that?
I wasn't here, and I'm not going to profess to suggest I have any idea. But
Is that something that we could try to bargain back in?
Absolutely, anything's bargainable. So, I mean, if that's an item that is a matter that the district believes and the board believes should be bargained, we put that on the list of things to take to the table when the time is appropriate.
It seems like a reasonable thing to look into, Scott, I agree.
I know I hear from parents what a nightmare it is when you take the days back, you take them back away because they're already planning to go away, and then,
I hear what you're saying, but, we publish this calendar. We're hopefully going to get it approved in February, and we're telling parents that don't count on all those days being available for your vacation. So, and the flip side...
But look at your statistics. I'm sure your attendance drops tremendously.
But the difference is not the difference is, and I'm not trying to defend this. I mean, I'm not in favor of the way we do it either, but I need, it's my responsibility as superintendent to bring forth a schedule, a calendar that...
And it's contractual. You answered the question. It's contractual.
Yeah. So
it is what it is for the next year, but in terms of can we revisit it within the new bargaining and have it, something in place in 2017 for the next year, that's something that can definitely be looked at.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions or concerns about the calendar?
Just real quick, in terms of when you gave this to the teachers' organization, was there much pushback from what you had originally presented them with? Was there much negotiation, or were they pretty much, was there a lot of back and forth? I don't know if you can discuss that, or,
I think it's appropriate for me to respond by saying that this is the calendar that we're going to bring forward, and whether there was a lot of pushback or a little pushback, that's immaterial. What needs to take place is we need to find a calendar that can work within the rules that are defined by past practice, that are defined by contract, and that we can that are consistent with what our parents have expected. So this is what I'm giving you is what our parents are used to. Okay, so I mean, doing something totally different could potentially create new problems where we don't currently have, or what we don't currently have. So that's my response.
Yeah, I wasn't going down that road. It was more of just the idea of to get the bigger picture. If when we're talking about contract opening up, and could we revisit snow days? Just trying to get a general idea of if this was a pretty easily come around calendar, or if this is something that could be part of the negotiations. Not necessarily about this calendar right here, but in terms of moving forward, is this something that could be contentious, probably not the thing, but something that would be a back and forth discussion that they haven't been super happy about the way that it is now. Just a broader broader picture question than opposed to...
Yeah, so a broader picture, any language that's in a contract can be negotiated away. And typically, the word negotiation means that if I want something, I ask you for it, and you ask me for something in return. And typically, that's the way that process goes. So when Mr. Dorn asked me about what could we have possibly gotten for giving that away, I don't know. And it could have been something very good, it could have been something not so good, but essentially, negotiation is just that. So any matter is negotiable in terms of whether it's a keeper no matter what. I doubt it. So that means that I hope that helps clarify it for you.
I understand it's a contractual issue, and it has, Scott's right, people do bring it up. I work for a district that builds in snow days, but is there anything in the administrative contract to do with days off and snow days and things like that? Or is it just in the teachers?
Well, I think there's items in almost every contract that suggest when there are vacation days or required holidays. So, yeah, I mean, when we sit down and talk about a calendar, we couldn't certainly, if, for example, the administrators were supposed to have off on a particular holiday because it's built into their contract, we couldn't bring kids in on the holiday. But we typically don't have days other than those that are identified as holidays. So, for example, Martin Luther King, that's a day that the district as a whole celebrates. And we celebrate it in a respectful manner that we should. But it does require that we're off on that day because several contracts, suggest that you're off. And so in addition to not only the teacher's contract, all of the other, contracts are up for negotiation as well. So if there's matters as important as the calendar is to us, we need to sit down and kind of frame that out and how that is to be played out in the long run.
All right, one last person. I was going to say question, but I don't know how many questions you have.
No, it has to do with the schedule for the North Montco Technical Career Center, and I think you said that they start before the 6th of September. And so do we know what impact it would have on our students if they miss the first several days at North Montco?
We do, and that was a challenge for us last year, as you may recall, but we were the only district in that challenge. This year, the teachers will be faced with meeting the challenges of Methacton and Perkiomen Valley, because we both start on the same time. So, for example, last year it was much more difficult to just take out one school district, and in some shops they're called, or some programs, there might be only one or two Methacton students where that creates a problem for the teacher. But in this instance this year, we have Perkiomen Valley and Methacton starting on the 6th, and it's more. It's easier handled by the teachers because it's typically going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of half to a third of their class that they'll have to bring up to speed for those days missed.
So our students, no matter where they go to school, if they're at North Montco or if they're at Methacton, they follow the same schedule as the Methacton School District schedule. It's not possible to accommodate them for a different schedule for the Technical Career Center to give them the full year at the school?
We would not start them any other time than what we're presenting here this evening. Any other questions on the calendar? So if there are no more other questions, that'll be on the agenda for your approval on the 23rd. Moving on, we have the principles for governance and leadership. This is a document that was posted online, and this is to approve the PSBA principles of governance leadership. It replaces the PSBA standards for effective governance and code of conduct. Generally speaking, this is a PSBA recommended code of governance that the board typically adopts every year. So you've seen this, and I've provided this for you. It's located online, and we'll ask you to approve that. Gifts and donations, we accept a gift for $500 from Paul Toms for the backpack program at Audubon Elementary School. Under number 14, dates for board members' calendars, our next scheduled meeting is February 23rd. Under old business, is there any desire from the board at this time to talk about committee dates, board meeting schedules, anything of that nature? If not, then I'd likely will be bringing a recommendation on March's schedule, if not some additional months' schedules to for your consideration at the 23rd meeting, because we need to get those advertised and scheduled.
Wasn't there a couple of dates that we were looking to change? There was a couple of modifications, I think, that were suggested from a date perspective. Have we seen the new ones?
No, there were a few that were thrown out. There were concerns about varying days of meetings. There were concerns about butting up meetings against each other. Essentially, typically we would have a calendar in January that would take it out for the remainder of the year. It's just getting difficult to do it on a month-by-month basis. I'm just going to let you know that. And secondly, it's even difficult to get everybody's calendars squared away for an annual year schedule. So, it's something that I need to work with the board president on. We'll have some conversations about that, and I'd like to be able to bring something forward on the 23rd for your consideration, because I think the sooner we get that information out, it helps our schedules, as well as it'll help the public have a better idea about what is they can expect.
Yeah, I just would say that the sooner the better that we figure this out. Because like you said, in the past, it's been January, and we can get it done for the year. I know it's probably some sacrifices all around with, schedules and everything, but I think that it's important to get this schedule figured out as soon as possible and that we can get it going forward. I mean, I understand how hard it is.
Yeah, it's not just about the schedule, it's about the format. So, for example, when we're talking about trying a new format for a couple months, we're talking about, we got a work session and we're butting up a finance committee to a work session so that we can, have everyone be able to participate, or butting up an education committee with a work session. So, it's just something that, until we know what the structure is officially for long term.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't think the issues that I heard at the last board meeting necessarily were that monumental. I think one of the biggest one was, the May finance meeting being early in the month versus later in the month, and having to get a budget approved by the board and then advertise for the 30 days. I think the May meeting, and I don't have the schedule in front of me, was like the second week of May, and oftentimes we're working that budget all the way up through, in the case of, I think it was the Finance Committee, and those dates the Finance Committee was very early in the month versus maybe a little later, maybe the week prior to the board meeting, so that we can work the budget. So it might be a flip-flop. To me, I think that was the biggest issue that I saw. It wasn't a matter of a lot of other things. I mean, there were probably some minor stuff, but that, to me, the May Finance Committee meeting, I think, was an issue.
I took note of that, and we'll get that into the conversation and get a draft out.
Yeah, I remember that too. Stuart, you might be able to help too, because I think it was in off months, every other month. Wasn't it going to be an issue too? Would we be able to have the financial reports done if the finance meeting was that early in the month? Would that be an issue at all? I don't know how long it takes you to get all of the various reports that we get, if that should be taken into account when we're trying to figure out the finance meetings in terms of beginning versus end of month, making sure that you have enough time to get the reports done and completed in time. Just something that...
We got to consider that. So those original documents out to you was a draft idea, and we got your feedback. We need to put that in place. We need to put the second draft in place. The next item, is there any other new business for us to consider this evening? If not, we have courtesy of the floor.
Open it up to courtesy of the floor. Anybody?
Candy Alaba, Igaville. I have some comments about the school calendar. I have for a lot of years heard parents complain, you can't start the school year early because it interferes with vacations. You can't extend the school year because it interferes with vacations. You can't cut off spring break because it interferes with vacations. Children have to go to school 180 days. I think maybe the public needs to realize education comes first before vacations. This is February 16th. We've had a major snowstorm already. We lost two instructional days. We still have to get through March. Last year we had a bad snowstorm in March. We lucked out this week because school was off Friday, Monday, and Tuesday. It's a 5-day weekend for the kids. The snow happened yesterday. They were off this morning. There was no 2-hour delays. If this is part of the teacher's contract, the public has not been informed about this. We are never informed about anything that has to do with anyone's contracts. I think at this point, if the teachers don't want to give up snow days, give up their in-service days. If they don't want to extend the school year, something's got to give. The kids have to go to school. If I'm not wrong, I think Philadelphia, their school year extends almost, goes till almost the end of June. And I think, I have no idea why, because I don't know if they start later. But it's hard down there because they're old buildings, there's no air conditioning, the kids have half days. But at some point, vacations are fine, they're important, but the kids' education comes first. And the fact is, we are not privy to anybody's contracts, but we are told as taxpayers, we have to pay for these contracts. So I think it's time the public has some input and say what goes into the contracts. You need to sit down and negotiate, and there has to be give and take on snow days. I mean, I understand schools have to close certain days and start late certain days because it's a liability issue. I understand that with the buses on the road and the kids. But the parents also have to realize their children's education comes first. And don't make these vacations knowing things are up in the air, especially during the winter. I mean, I know we call it spring break now. It used to be called Easter break, so now we're politically correct. So the kids are off Friday and Monday. But education needs to come first, and you need to look at this count. I know it's going to come up next year in a contract. But the last contract, the public was never informed of what was put into it. Nothing. There was a tentative vote in September of 2013, and nothing else was ever said about the contract. So this is, I know, is this schedule kind of like set in stone because of the contract obligations, the school calendar? Because it does sound a lot like last year's. And, I mean, I know you can't do much now, but this is something you have to look into. And I'm saying this, I mean, I have no skin in the game anymore. My kids are done, but I'm also being asked to help pay for these contracts every year. So you need to take the whole public into consideration, and the parents need to understand priorities when it comes to their children's education. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? John had his hand up first.
Good evening. John Andrews, Lower Providence. I think we all benefited from the extensive discussions of the evening's meeting so far. I'm going to jump around a little bit. I have some comments. Relative to the school calendar, looking at it, there are things on it called holiday. Well, most of those holidays are defined and named by federal law. We used to have Lincoln's birthday and Washington's birthday. They got combined into President's Day, Labor Day, etc. And I think we send the wrong message to the students with such a sterile calendar that doesn't name any one of them. You know, those named holidays, some of them are patriotic, some of them are memorializing servicemen who died in the cause of our country. Some of them are religious. You know, and you know, I think you know, you do an injustice to everyone by making such a sterile calendar. With regard to the new PSBA document, the Principles of Government and Leadership, under one item it says, honor the sanctity of executive session. Sanctity is defined in the dictionaries as holiness of life and character, things like that. It's a religious term, and you know, I think it would be much better to change that phrasing to honor either the confidentiality or the secrecy of executive session. Now, the prior document that the board would annually affirm was developed, yes, I think something like 2005, and one of the participants in that development was a former superintendent here, namely Dr. Miller, who was involved with that before he came to Methacton. But I have no clue as to what process led to the document that is proposed to be affirmed this year. But again, I think that the word sanctity absolutely does not fit. With regard to the list of bills, I think it's curious that Fidavia is still billing us for work late in the year after the contractors have left. So it seems like that's, you know, I don't know. I can't imagine that there was $9,200 worth of services after you know, originally the Fidavia was going to be in here for a few weeks, and then the work pretty much ended up at the end of September, and now we're still getting bills for later in the year. There's one thing on the list of bills a bill by the Bank of America for a sports lighting lease for $341,000, and it seems to me that that's a field lighting expense that should be put on the Emmaus bond issue. So I think that deserves some explanation. With regard to Mr. Whiteleather's discussion of the revenue status for this year, he said that the EIT was off $100,000, and doing some simple math, that says to me that the district has something like 400 fewer people employed, which is a rather significant number, and supports comments of various members of the public that maybe Methacton is still in recession. With regard to getting to the school board's goal in the motion of limiting the tax increase to 2.4%, I think it's becoming obvious to a number of us, including Mr. Doran, that, you know, having the outside contract for review of high school scheduling, having that report in December doesn't help this budget. And for the life of me, I think that you know, they could be participating cooperatively with the high school people on the scheduling for the upcoming school program for next year, and that because we've gone in the high school from 1,800 students down to 1,600 students with no change in teaching staff. And that just does not compute. And I wonder, where there are study halls, do we now have 4 teachers in them where we used to have 1 teacher? And for study halls, do we even need a teacher? Could we just have an instructional assistant? And I think a point of clarification, there was mention of the last time we did the early retirement incentives, that 19 teachers signed up. And I'm thinking that was for the 14-15 year rather than this year. So maybe someone can clarify which year benefited from, or which year did that take effect for? Thank you.
Thank you. Greg?
Greg Pelicano, Eagleville. First, congratulations on the lights, Dr. Zerbe. I saw the poles and the lighting up there, so that's looking very nice. So it'd be nice to turn them on. When do you think we'll be able to turn them on?
If weather holds, we're hopefully by the end of March.
Okay, great. That's awesome. I just wanted to follow up on the question Ms. Reese asked you. I don't remember reading anything in the administrator's contract that said that we couldn't extend the school year by 2 days or anything like that. Is that accurate? I just wanted to make sure in the question, how you've answered our question.
Well, there's nothing in any agreement that says that this is the schedule.
Right.
Each agreement has certain bits of language that allows us to do certain things.
Right.
And so, as just one example, the teacher's contract has the stipulation about where the first 2 snow days come from.
Right.
And so that sets the calendar, and you work backwards and forwards on that, and that's how it comes about. And so there's the administrative contract has some spelled out specific holidays in them.
Right.
And
yeah,
so
but I was just thinking about the back end days, really.
Typically have off on those days anyhow, but it's accurate in to say that all the agreements have something in it that will affect how our calendar will ultimately look.
Right.
And the federal and state holidays have play into that as well.
Yeah. And just to bring up, I guess, at the Finance Committee a couple months ago, when you were looking at that consultant who's going to be looking at, I guess, optimizing the schedule, I think you talked about how, for example, if we were able to extend the school day, 5 or 7 minutes, that could create a lot more flexibility and all that. I mean, that is another item in the teacher's contract that I think you should look at to be able to give us that flexibility to do that. Just as if, for example, you wanted to extend the school day 5 minutes a day times 180 to build in some time for school day, snow days, you could also do it that way by adding extra minutes to the day. Is another probably method that could happen, couldn't it?
You can't add minutes to gain days. Days are days, minutes are minutes. There are 2 requirements under the attendance regulations.
So how would we be able to then take advantage of optimizing schedule? Because I think in that Finance Committee meeting, you talked about extending the school day a few extra minutes, and that would give us more flexibility in optimizing the schedule.
Well, the flexibility isn't necessarily in gaining days. It's in the flexibility of having our teachers in front of students and/or getting us the ability to have in-service days. Our issue is at the high school particularly that we have less in-service days at the high school than we do at any of the other levels. And by adding minutes to the day would then allow us to have additional day or 2 within the calendar for professional development.
Okay. But again, that's another contractual item that you'll need to look into, I guess, if that's something you're going to consider, right?
Well, it's less contractual than it is operationally.
Okay.
That's
both.
partly,
Both.
yeah.
Okay. I guess just to follow up on some of the commentary on the budget, I guess Mr. Ryan had mentioned it. I think Mr. Boardman as well. But just a suggestion, too, I guess if you're going to be getting some additional detail, I mean, I'd really suggest that you get a detailed schedule of every teacher and administrator by school, and you get those salaries, and you should be able to tie them out to the budget. I think that would be a good, schedule to have, to make sure you're able to tie out all those salary schedules. Another thing I think that would be good to have is for all the IT consulting, and I guess even legal spend to a degree, but I know that's a little bit more tougher to do, but on the IT and consulting, what are all the projects that are planned for the current year? What's the business benefit of those projects? What's the educational benefit, so that you can really look at them and make that determination? Because, Dr. Zerbe, I know you kind of juggle things as you need to, but I think then the board at least would have the visibility and understanding what some of those decisions are, both from a business and educational benefit, if you look at what makes up those projects. Legal, I'm not sure if you can do it that way, but to the extent you can, that might be not a bad idea to also have that sort of information. Similar to the zero budget discussion and whatever the other numbers were that were thrown out, and I think Mr. Dorn was right, you have to have all the options on the table here, including some of the outsourcing or co-sourcing functions that have been talked about. Some of those things are seven-figure savings that are out there. Just as I think was talked about at one of the other previous board meetings with the consolidation, that's another potential seven-figure savings. I think the public needs to understand what the magnitude of those savings are, just so they can hear them. What else here? I think that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Bickelman from Audubon. I just want to congratulate the board with all the open discussion on all the different topics today. I want to speak to the one budget issue where we are considering bringing in a transportation consultant to optimize our routing. We hired a transportation director for $82,000 for the 15-16 year, and his major job description is to design the most efficient routes for the district. And I don't see what the purpose is bringing an outside consultant. We brought this gentleman in based on his expertise and knowing that one of his most primary jobs was for routing. And I think if you do bring a consultant in, I think it should be deducted from his pay, because this guy's supposed to be the expert in routing. So the other item was with the discussion about the early retirement incentive plan. I really liked the discussion on this, because the last one that was passed at a work session, and it wasn't even on the agenda. So I appreciate the discussion, the groups of people that are possible takers on this incentive plan. So I really appreciate the openness and the discussion with the public and the board members. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right, we're ready to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second? Everybody? Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Have a great night.